إزاي تقدر تعرف تاريخ شعب من خلال الأكل؟ أدريان ميلر عنده الإجابة. أدريان ميلر مؤرخ طعام، محلل قانوني، كاتب، مستشار رئاسي. في عالم الأكل ممكن نعتبره واحد من العلامات المؤثرة. قضى 10 سنين كاملة بيدوق أكلات الأمريكيين من أصل أفريقي في كل حتة في الولايات المتحدة، وكتب 3 كتب، ومع كل طبق كتب عنه أضاف حكاية من حكايات شكلت الوجدان الأمريكي الأفريقي على مر التاريخ. في زيارته لمصر بقى لسه عنده كتير عشان يدوق.
So this is not my first time visiting Egypt. I was here 27 years ago. It was a gift to myself. I took the big test to become a lawyer in the United States. And so as a gift to myself, I came to Egypt. And the reason why is as a little kid, we had a set of encyclopedias. And I read the entire set. And when I got to the picture of the Great Pyramids, I was just completely enthralled, right? And I said, one day, I'm gonna make it. And I had a really good time. I'll have to tell you, this is gonna be funny. So when, people are trying to sell me stuff, right? So when I was walking down the street, people would yell out the names of random black celebrities to get my attention. So they would say, Michael Jordan, Michael Tyson, Michael Jackson.
دي مش المرة الأولى لميلر عشان يزور مصر، بس الزيارة دي مختلفة.
This time around, I have been honored to be part of the U.S. State Department's culinary and cultural diplomacy programs. And so embassies around the world get to decide who they would like to invite to share about U.S. culture. And so I've had the honor of talking about soul food and other things on behalf of the U.S. Embassy here in Cairo. So good to be back.
بلد أجنبي ومطبخ جديد وثقافة مختلفة. يا ترى إيه هو رأي مؤرخ الطعام في المطبخ المصري؟
I'm realizing now, because I wasn't well versed in Egyptian cuisine, is that a lot of the stuff that I thought is Egyptian actually is from other parts of the Middle East. So the things that I've liked so far that I've tried, I like full a lot. Earlier this morning, I had a meeting with some Egyptian chefs. And so I really, for the first time, I've had falafel made from beans. Because normally in the United States, it's made with chickpeas. So it's a different texture, similar taste, but I really enjoyed it. And so I like that. And then I also had some beetroot tahini, which I thought was really interesting. And so seeing some of these dishes was fascinating. So I have a lot more eating to do and just to explore. But I'm eager to learn a lot about Egyptian food because I'm familiar with things like hummus, baba ganoush, and some other dishes. But what I'm understanding is that those aren't really Egyptian dishes. They're just parts of other cultures. They're popular here, of course, but not Egyptian food.
مؤرخ الطعام أدريان ميلر. يعني إيه مؤرخ طعام؟ وإيه علاقة المطبخ بثقافة الشعوب؟
So I think food tells us the story of a people because it's an interesting combination of how these things get on a plate. So when I'm presented a plate of food, I'm curious, like, how did these things come together? Why are we eating this sequence of food? Why this particular collection of food? And so with African American cuisine, you can see that it's a combination of Western Africa, Western Europe, and the Americas. So right there, that's telling you that there was a movement of the people. Now that movement was not voluntary because West Africans were brought to the Americas as enslaved people, but then at some point we started to embrace the foods of other cultures. So for instance, macaroni and cheese, which is clearly Italian in origin, is a very popular dish in African American circles. So much so that I know black people who think that we invented macaroni and cheese. It's clearly not the case, but that just shows you how these things come together.
السول فود إيه هو؟ وإزاي اختلط المطبخ الأفريقي بالأكل الأمريكي؟
And what I tell people is that soul food is a migrant cuisine in two ways. So there's first the forced migration from West Africa to the Americas. But then once you get in the American South, after slavery, African Americans could freely leave on their own to explore other opportunities in parts of the United States. And so when you get to a new place, you do what any other migrant group does, right? You try to recreate home.
طبعا هي مش مفاجأة إن ميلر مؤرخ الطعام الشغوف عنده علاقة خاصة مع الأكل.
And so when you look at how soul food plays out in these different places, you can see regional variations. So you can see the template, right? But you can say, oh, in this part they do collard greens, or in this part they do mustard greens. Now, why do they do that? Well, maybe mustard greens were more plentiful. And so that's how you get a sense of the story of a people.
المشاركة في الأكل ليها متعة خاصة، وتشارك الثقافات بين الشعوب بيخلي العالم كأنه مطعم كبير.
First of all, we have similar ingredients. So one thing that shows up is there's a lot of okra in Middle Eastern foods. You know, like the combination of okra and tomatoes is something you see in the Middle East. Okra, tomatoes, and lamb. Hibiscus. Here you all call it karkadeh, but you know, we have bissap in West Africa, and then sorrel in Jamaica, and then we call it red drink pretty much everywhere else. So you see these common ingredients. You see the interaction and clashing of cultures, and in some cases people were forced to eat a certain food. And then you see some things that people took voluntarily. So I think there's very much a similar trajectory to the Middle Eastern cuisines and the cuisines of America. It's just the movement of Africa to other parts of the world.
ثقافة الأكل زيها زي أي ثقافة، ميراث بتورثه الأجيال لبعض عشان تحافظ على أركان حضارتها، وميلر دايما بيبقى حريص إن هو يشيل الراية دي في مسيرته المهنية.
Yeah, so it says that I love food too much. That's probably one of the things you'd say. I call myself a curious guy with an appetite. And so, I mean, I love food, but I'm really interested in the backstory of food. You know, not only what does it say about a people, but what does it say about a point in time? What does it say about the interaction of cultures and how it brings people together? Cooking food is an act of love, because when someone cooks food for you, they're saying that they care about your survival. Now, even if the food is straight nasty, the act of cooking is still meaningful, right? And so I think it's something that unites us. We all have to eat. And it's unfortunate that because of society, things that are going on in society, we don't get to eat together as much as we should, but that's something we can change. And I love the fact that the table is one of the few places left in all of our societies where people from different walks of life can come together.
ميلر عاش واحدة من أغرب النقلات المهنية في التاريخ، من مستشار البيت الأبيض لعالم الطعام.
I had worked in the Clinton White House, and at that time of my life, I wanted to move back to Colorado and become a politician. And so I was trying to get back to Colorado to start my political career, and I was in Washington, D.C. But the job market was really slow. And so I was watching a lot of daytime television and horrible shows. I'm not even gonna tell you what. And so I felt so bad that I said, you know what, I should read something. So I went to a local bookstore, and I'm browsing in the cookbook section because I like to cook, because I did so as a little kid. And I saw this book on the history of Southern food by a guy named John Edgerton. It was called Southern Food at Home, on the Road in History. And in that book, he wrote that the tribute to Black achievement in American cookery has yet to be written.
الفرص في الحياة بتستنى قدام عينينا مستنية اللحظة المناسبة، وميلر كان من الناس المحظوظين اللي عرفوا يستغلوها.
So I reached out to him and by email, and I just asked him, I said, you know, you wrote this 14 years ago, do you still think this is true? And he said, you know, for the most part, nobody's taken on the full story. There's always room for another voice, so why not yours? So with no qualifications at all, except for eating a lot of soul food and cooking it some, that's what launched me on the journey. So I did make it back to Colorado. I did get a job in politics. And so I was like a graduate student, you know, someone pursuing a graduate education. So I, in the weekends and my hours after work, just started doing all the research I could on finding about African-American food traditions.
أول كتاب كان بيوثق رحلة المطبخ الجنوبي المستمد من ثقافة الأمريكيين من أصل أفريقي.
So to write this first book on soul food, that meant reading 3,500 oral histories of formerly enslaved people. So these were people that were interviewed by the federal government in the United States and later in life. And I just went through and looked for every reference for food. I read about 500 cookbooks. Now, not all of them were authored by African Americans. And the reason why I read that many books is because I wanted to put African American food in a culinary context. So I was reading Middle Eastern cookbooks, I was reading European cookbooks and Asian, because I wanted to see the common ingredients and techniques and just try to suss out what was going on with African American food. Read thousands of newspaper articles because there are companies digitizing them and they're word searchable. Talked to hundreds of people about the food traditions, what they thought they were, what they are now, where they may be going. And then because I care about my craft so deeply, I decided to eat my way through the United States. So I went to 150 soul food restaurants in 35 cities in 15 states. So that's all the research that I put into this book.
وفي كتابه التاني اختار ميلر انه يأرخ تواجد الأمريكيين من أصل أفريقي في مطبخ البيت الأبيض.
Through my own research, I discovered 150 African Americans who have cooked for our presidents. So the thing to remember is that African Americans have cooked for every single US president in some capacity, either in the presidential kitchen, or when the president traveled, or when the president was at leisure. 150 is an impressive number because a lot of these people no one knew about until I brought them to light. I think there's scores more stories that need to be discovered and told.
بعد البحث ده يا ترى مين كان أغرب رئيس أمريكي في علاقته بالأكل؟
Okay, I think the best answer for that is Calvin Coolidge, who was president of the United States in the 1920s. So he was somebody who was a very picky eater, didn't eat a lot, and then he didn't want to spend a lot of money on food. So after dinner, he would go down and see what the people in the kitchen were eating, if they were wasting. I mean, this guy was hardcore, and so he was just really cheap. So to me, he had the weirdest relationship with food. I think our early presidents like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were what we would call gourmands. So they were people really, really interested in food, and they wanted to have the best on their table.
هل يا ترى ممكن نعرف أكتر عن سياسة رئيس جمهورية من خلال اللي هو بياكله على الترابيزة؟
Yeah, because the savviest presidents realized that they could use food to curry favor with the American public. We want presidents who are exceptional people, but we also want them to be a lot like us. And so a savvy president understands that if I can show how I like the food of my childhood, how I like the pastimes of my childhood, that connects me with people. And then if you're popular, that gives you more power. That gives you more political power, right? Because nobody wants to cross a popular president because they know that they'll pay a price. And so, but believe it or not, very few presidents have figured that out. President Obama, I think, was really good at this. And President Clinton and President George W. Bush started doing this as well.
ولأن ميلر كان مستشار للبيت الأبيض خلال فترة رئاسة الرئيس ال 42 للولايات المتحدة بيل كلينتون، فأكيد هو عنده كتير يقوله عن سياسة كلينتون مع الأكل وعن علاقته هو الشخصية بالأكل.
Oh, well, you know, any president who jogs to McDonald's has an interesting relationship with food, right? So obviously that was not good for him because he ended up having a triple bypass and he's now a vegan. And we're so glad, we're blessed that President Clinton is still with us. But, you know, the White House would release recipes. And then during the George W. Bush White House years, and then also with President Obama, they started giving more public details about state dinners. So those things used to be just really exclusive. The only people who knew what was going on were the people invited to that dinner. But in recent years, they've now started doing, releasing the menu, and he started doing little video short takes of the White House kitchen staff, the White House chef explaining what's going on. So they're bringing in what we call foodies in the United States to this moment. And then they're also taking the opportunity to celebrate American ingredients. First Lady Hillary Clinton really was the one who kind of pushed this to create meals that celebrate different American ingredients. But then what they would do is they would make it in a way that had a flavor profile that was a nod to the visiting dignitary.
وفي كتابه الثالث بلاك سموك كان عنده قصة اختاروا انه يبقى أول واحد يسجل تاريخها.
Black Smoke in the United States of Barbecue. So it is a celebration of African-American barbecue culture. And the reason why I wrote this book is because in the United States, when it comes to media about barbecue, they pretty much only show white dudes. And there's really four kinds of white dudes. So you have what we call the Bubba, and that's the working class, rural kind of white guy. And then you've got the guys on the competition circuit. So the people that are doing, you know, really interesting things and competing for contests, often for big money. And then you have what we call the urban hipster. So these are the guys with like facial hair, interesting facial hair, piercings, tattoos, skinny jeans maybe, although that doesn't happen in barbecue that often. And then you've got the fine dining chefs who are in it. Because 20 years ago, you would not see a fine dining chef doing barbecue because it was considered working class now. And so the problem is that with all of the media attention turned on these white guys, basically, it's crowded out any coverage of other people, women and African Americans who are really steeped in this tradition. And so I wrote this book because barbecue is very trendy, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, and it's very lucrative now.
مرة تانية قدر ميلر يلاقي الفرصة انه يحكي قصة محدش حكاها قبله، والأسباب اللي دفعته إنه يعمل ده المرة دي كانت أقوى بكتير.
I just wanted to use a figurative expression from the United States, to do a thump on the head and say, look, if you're going to talk about barbecue, you have to include African Americans. And unfortunately, for the last couple of decades, when it came to telling stories about barbecue, people only offered up white people as the experts in this subject, which is completely crazy because before the 1990s, it would be weird to do any kind of barbecue storytelling and not include an African American.
Black Smoke اسم مثالي لكتاب تاريخ المشويات الأمريكية من أصل أفريقي. يا ترى العنوان ده خطر على بال ميلر إزاي؟
So one day I was watching CNN and at that moment they were deciding which pope to choose. And the way they choose the pope is white smoke comes out and say something like, we're waiting for this white smoke. And I was like, black smoke.
بجانب أعمال ميلر العظيمة والمناصب العالية الكتيرة اللي شغالها، باين برضه إن هو شخص بسيط دمه خفيف. كفاية بس انت تعرف سبب اختياره للشعار بتاعه.
I call myself the soul food scholar and my tagline is dropping knowledge like hot biscuits. So that's like a play off Snoop Dogg, drop it like it's hot.
أدريان ميلر رجل استثنائي، الكلام معاه ما بيخلصش، ومن ناحيته كان ده رأي ميلر في قعدته معانا.
It's so good to be with Food Today to share the history of soul food and African American cuisine. And I just want to say, in my culture, we have this expression, put your foot in it, and that means you did a really good job. So I hope you all will cook soul food and enjoy it and come to love it.